And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konodike outside Spartan Stadium. A lot has happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks, Paul. Not much of it good for Michigan State football. The Mel Tucker situation, suspended coach, soon to be fired head coach, as Michigan State sent him a letter of intent to terminate on Monday. He had a response today. We talked about that over at SpartanMag.com with coverage. In the meantime, Michigan State 41-7 losing to Washington. Harlan Barnett met with media today talking about football things. And like I mentioned with you and mentioned on the message board at SpartanMag.com. By the way, if you're seeing this, go over to SpartanMag.com, become a subscriber, $1 for the month. We're going to have coverage of Michigan State's coaching search. It's going to be a new head coach, most likely at Michigan State. Harlan Barnett still trying to demonstrate that he can keep the job. They need to win a lot of games in order for that to happen. So he is a candidate, but coverage of the coaching search, SpartanMag.com, every day, all day. Become a subscriber over there.
By the way,
sure.
Good job on that initial head coaching kind of article that you put out there.
Oh, yeah?
Lots of different guys on there, and I think you covered the bases pretty well.
Thanks, and thank you. And there's more in terms of assistant coaches that are going to. We'll have a part 2 to that with assistant coaches that are going to be on the radar. Alan Haller and Michigan State. That process, in some ways, has already started because people have reached out to Michigan State. So there is talk there. But Michigan State as a university and Alan Haller, they're supporting Harlan Barnett, who is worthy of support. I mean, I thought he was good today, even coming off that terrible loss for Michigan State on Saturday. He's still upbeat, still smiling, task-oriented. But Paul, he mentioned the word discipline at least 6 or 7 or 8 times about what they needed to do. And as I went back and watched the game, and I've not been through it all yet, but I was making notes about, the discipline has fallen off here. And that's something that they cannot have happen. For instance, the interception that Noah Kim threw, Trey Mosley, the most dependable player maybe on the roster. It's a slant, and he kind of banana peeled that thing. And, the safety read it early, and I think it was a nickel, read it early, got there, made the interception. Not necessarily a bad throw for Noah Kim. I'm not sure. It might have been broken up. I'm not sure. But the route was not a sharp slant. And Trey Mosley's a very proud person, well accomplished here. Today, Harlan Barnett did not mention names, but he said he showed to the team that there's things that you do in practice, and you do it right all week at practice. And he mentioned maybe a receiver has run a route at 14 yards. It's supposed to be a 14-yard route. He runs it all week at 14 yards, gets in the game, runs it at 12, and then he didn't finish the statement. Now, this was a slant. I don't know if he's talking about that play specifically, but I think he might have been. But there were a lot of things across the board that were like that, Paul, that from a football standpoint, when I went back and watched it, this is usually not the case, but it was worse than I actually thought. We all know that Michigan State was assaulted, was destroyed through the air in that game. Everybody saw that. Could not cover those guys. Couldn't get any pass rush. We all know that. But when I went back and saw some of those loose screws from a discipline standpoint, that's what he said they're needing to work on. But that's troubling with 9 games to go or 8 games to go.
It's troubling, but you also have to take it to the caveat of everything that's going on outside the program. Does that affect guys? Are their heads where they need to be? And because you say that you're a mission focused or mission driven, and because you do some good things in practice, that doesn't mean that you're where you need to be. I'll say another thing that Harlan Barnett was talking about, like a lot of the plays where maybe 9 guys or 10 guys are doing the right thing and 2 guys aren't, or 1 guy is not. It doesn't, the football is the ultimate team sport, so it takes 1 guy to mess up a play for everything to go sideways. I've said it last week. I'll say it again. Michigan State wasn't going to win that game against Washington. Yeah, you'd like to see a much better product on the field, but I have to wonder how much of in retrospect, how much of kind of like a knuckleball, everything. Of course, it was devastating for those guys, whether they say so or not. And for a team like Washington to prepare for that, and I don't think that would have been easy. I don't think it would have been easy against a lesser opponent. I think you could look at it. You could look at it and say, hey, maybe this is a perfect storm scenario. You've got an elite offense coming in here that wants to make a statement, and not only that, a team on defense that feels like they're better than they've showed.
Yeah.
So.
That's the part that surprised me, Washington's defense. Go ahead.
But you talk about if these guys aren't ready to play mentally, you're going to be like, why is this going on? Why is that going on? We see it lots of times, even in some big games that Michigan State has played in basketball for whatever reason. I think back to a couple of Final Four games where maybe those guys weren't quite ready, or some early season games where where they play a really good team and they're not quite ready, or they do something uncharacteristic based on their opponent. Sometimes you're not ready for the moment. I don't feel Michigan State was ready for the moment. There's a huge crowd, a lot of energy. These guys, you could tell even by the way Michigan State warmed up that they wanted to go out there and perform at a high level. I don't think they were ready for that, and I don't think they had played a schedule that would prepare them for that either. So I guess the big question moving forward is, can they get back to some normalcy? And we'll have to wait and see, because Harlan Barnett was talking about after the game last weekend that he wanted to get back to a normal type schedule. Well, this hasn't been a normal type schedule. On Monday, athletic director Alan Haller was in there talking to the team about Mel Tucker's termination or intent to terminate letter, the fact that he was no longer going to be the head coach. Now, I'm guessing that none of the players in the program, those guys all knew that the writing was on the wall. Those guys probably all knew that Tucker wasn't going to be the head coach. But it's one thing to
Tucker was not going to be the head coach
moving forward. I'm sure they all knew that, but it's one thing to change gears and have your athletic director address you after practice and explain, okay, this is what's going to happen. It's another thing that kind of throws just the operation into a tizzy, I guess. And you wonder if those kind of things are going to have an effect moving forward. We won't know until game day.
I thought that Harlan Barnett, I know that he's the right person to try to tackle this assignment, which could lead to becoming an impossible assignment for a team that maybe wasn't that great, maybe wasn't that well drilled coming into the season, and maybe they didn't do enough to fix what needed to be done in the run game and in pass defense. And he's got to pick up the pieces in light of all this. He's the right person. He's well respected, all of that. But to have that interrupt practice again, he's a positive person. He's not going to make excuses and everything. But like I said in the VCast after the game, Izzo always talks about distractions and how much that can hurt when you're trying to iron things out. There's going to be players on this team that might lose. It only takes a little bit of loss of focus and intensity for it to wind up on the losing end of the scoreboard week after week after week. Right now, they don't have to worry about the problems in October and November. They've got this to deal with right now with Maryland coming to town. Maryland's a good team, 3-0. They were 8-5 last year, beat Michigan State last year. Tagovailoa is going to be very difficult to hem in. Barnett was talking about that today, that's a guy that he's a capture quarterback. As he said, it's not a kill quarterback that sits in the pocket. It's a guy they're going to want to capture and keep in the pocket. Meanwhile, Michigan State's going to do that. Who knows who they have on the defensive line. When I went back over the game, I was like, man, Zion Young is playing a lot of snaps. Went back and looked at it, played 51 snaps. That's too many. So you're wondering where the pass rush was, and he might look good on PN10, like the first play of a drive, but by play 6 or 7, you didn't have Adeleye out there, and he wasn't like a great player the first couple of weeks, but he can give you time and give Zion some time off the field. You didn't have Chumisi Adeleye, who was their first defensive end off the bench. Didn't have
Chris Bogle.
Bogle.
Not out there.
He started, played the first 4 plays, and was done. And I saw him stretching on the sideline. So you have 2 of your 4 rotational defensive ends. Zion Young's out there, so they're not getting any pass rush. Got a little bit from Barrow a couple times. Barrow was in the pocket and was in his face and affected the throw. I think on the one that was tipped and touchdown, he was in the face on that one. And it was either Barrow or Harmon was in his face when he threw. Penix threw from the end zone, the 55-yarder to Roma Dunze. So occasionally the defensive tackles got in there and pressed the pocket a little bit, but the lack of pass rush was also disconcerting. But depending on what's going on with the defensive line, Adeleye and who's the other one?
Bogle's the one that I'm concerned about, because those are the guys. I didn't know how much Adeleye would play in this game, but Bogle's the guy that can, that's really good, technically sound.
He can eat up snaps,
right,
so that Zion Young doesn't have to.
Right.
Brandon Wright, I thought, was excellent against Richmond. I thought he was Michigan State's best pass rusher that day, and he only played 19 or 20 snaps that day. Played 45 in this one, and had some moments where his pass rush ability looked live, but his play count went way up too because of the things we just mentioned. In the meantime, he was also he had a good pass rush once, had a positive impact on a play. I can't remember. I've got notes on it, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But I can remember a negative discipline play that he let out. It was 2nd and 4, and Washington's running a zone play. I've never done it. I'm not a defensive lineman at this level, but it seems like he should have identified run play right away. Instead, he was in pass rush mode and came up to the pocket, maybe because they've just been sizzling them through the air. And he's in pure pass rush mode. It's 2nd and 4, and it seems obvious it's a zone play, and just gives up the gap, and the running back gets out for a gain of 9. That's discipline too, transitioning from pass to run and just not being with it, whether it be Alante Brown not being on the line of scrimmage for the, it's 3rd and 5, Michigan State picks it up through the air, flag, too many men in the backfield, illegal formation. Right. Alante Brown didn't get up on the line, should have been up on the line. The tight end was Carr, and Carr stayed in to pass protect, so it's unbalanced. He was supposed to be up, and then he has the unsportsmanlike conduct on the same play. Discipline, discipline, discipline. This team has enough going against it, enough challenges. Those things need to be tightened up in order to move forward and have a chance to get some wins.
We were talking about in the off season, like in training camp, about the depth and the guys not having as many reps in practice and whatnot. And so you've got the depth that you finally want on the defensive line. Guys aren't going taking as many practice reps as a result. And now that they have to in a game, it's different. You look at Derek Harmon last year, guys like Simeon Barrow last year. During training camp, they were taking in a lot more reps. Simeon Barrow was capable of playing at a much higher level for a longer period of time because his conditioning was better, I think. And a lot of those guys were taking more reps, so they're used to doing more of that. Now it's different. If the whole goal of this thing is to have these guys take 30. Some of these guys take 30 reps, and if you have to take 50, it's a big difference. Unless you've been doing it in training camp, and they have not. They did not do that in training camp, and I think it shows. But the other thing was the substitution thing with guys being out. You saw a few times Brandon Wright in this game, or someone else, another defensive end was late getting into the game in a substitution deal, and that. Because that wouldn't be their normal rotation, and we saw that a lot in this game, and it's disconcerting, that kind of thing. But we didn't see it in the first 2 games, so it makes you wonder. I wonder about some of the special teams, whether guys not being enough guys being in the game, not knowing where to go, like. If some of the staff shakeup, if that changed some things, and I don't know, but we'll have to see what the operation looks like this week. I don't think any of the distractions, going back to what Haller was talking to the team, yeah, that's a distraction, but that's not as big as a distraction as they faced last week. So,
right.
But things do need to get buttoned up, and Michigan State needs to be, not all in just, emotionally. They have to be smart about it, and they have to do their work, and they have to be into the game mentally.
There's a lot of Michigan State fans that are looking forward to a coaching change at some point. I posted the question on the Underground Bunker message board over at SpartanMag.com, asking people if they would, what kind of scenario they were preferring to happen. And among the choices, there were some interesting responses. But, there's a lot of people out there that, of course, want to support this team, get to 6 wins, 7 wins, get to a bowl game, and still have a coaching change. And I think that is in the cards. I mentioned in the article earlier in the week that one of the things that goes against Barnett's candidacy is usually when there's an interim coach, and when you're looking at pros and cons to retain someone full time, it's whether or not you want continuity to be a positive. When Bobby Williams was hired went from interim to head coach before the bowl game, one of the pushing moments was, we're going to keep all the staff together and the entire recruiting class. That was a team that was 9-2. So there was reason to say, it's going well, let's keep it together. Of course, it didn't work out well. This situation, there's no push for continuity because there's assistant coaches that are still trying to prove themselves in year 4. So the idea of let's keep it together, he doesn't have anything to keep together. There's not a deep cast of proven players and coaches yet. I mean, coaches, not players. Then the player thing, that comes up too. So get to 6-6 these days, that's a bowl game. The extra practices, whatever, there'll be some players that will opt out. There'll be a lot that opt out if that happens, if they get to that point. But if you're a fan, I'm guessing that's what you root for. Get to 6-6, get to 7-5, win some rivalry games, do those things. You can do those without necessarily being worried that they might keep an interim coach that you don't want as a fan. I'm not telling people how to think, but that was one of the things that people talked about in that thread of the Underground Bunker message board.
Yeah, it's not like the NFL where the more losses you have, the better the draft pick you're going to get, right, or anything like that. So I think I think that's what people kind of think of. The other thing is with the continuity aspect, you think of back to that Bobby Williams era. You didn't have a portal. So no matter who is the coaching, no matter who is the coaching candidate, no matter who takes this job, there is going to be a considerable outflux of players, and likely a considerable influx of players. Especially if that coaching candidate is a head coach in a college program and he's well respected, there's a good chance that he's going to have players that he played for, if they like him, follow him to his new destination. But there's not, like, keeping the band together. There's no such thing anymore. Even if you get the best possible coaching candidate you can get, I think of like Luke Fickell at Wisconsin. There's guys coming out of that program. It's just the way it is. You're gonna have. Look at the Nebraska situation. Matt Rule is is a guy that I respect a lot. But how many guys did they lose? 46,
42, and they brought something like 40 in.
Right. So I mean, that's just it's what happens when there's a coaching change. Now that's why you've got it. That's why you've got to get the right guy.
And the rules that the NCAA has adopted in recent years, a lot of people thought that it was good for players and so forth, and maybe it was. That's debatable. But one of the unintended consequences is when you have a coaching change, I mean, it's an avalanche of negativity for the reasons you just mentioned, and also you throw in that signing day has moved to December 15th or in mid-December. It used to be in February. When it was a coaching change, Saban came in here in 1994, put together a fairly decent class by February. John L. Smith was hired in late December. He didn't have a good class. Nowadays, I mean, you have to have a head coach by Thanksgiving.
You look at Mark D'Antonio's first recruiting class. There's a lot of NFL guys in there. Kirk Cousins, B.J. Cunningham, Greg Jones. I mean, that was a really, really good recruiting class.
Had time from late November to
Nick
February,
Foles,
from late November to February to put that together. Now you're looking late November to December 15th when you hire a new coach, the first recruiting class nowadays is almost impossible.
The flip side of that too is
unless you go. The other rules are the roster dump, which Deion Sanders has done at Colorado. But I think that rule was put in place for like a 2-year stipulation. I don't know if the NCAA, I don't know if that extends beyond 2024, or I don't think that's a permanent thing. So all these rules, it's tough for a program that is looking for a new head coach in late November.
Yeah, but the flip side of that too is if you have a good evaluation type deal, there are more high school players around as well because of the portal. So I mean, but you have to be smart about it. Like, I think in this era, like a Mark D'Antonio with what they had going on as far as identification and player development, those guys would have been just fine moving, in this environment, moving into a new program, because they would have guys scouted pretty well in the state of Ohio, that type of thing. And I think of like Chris L. Rucker.
Yeah.
Those kind of guys that ended up being like, I think there's like 7 NFL guys maybe in his first class, 6 or 7, maybe 5. But for a class that was put together late, that's kind of crazy when you think about it. So a lot of it comes down to scouting talent, development, and then obviously they've got to do a good job. I mean, they're going to lose players, but they have to do a good job bringing in guys in the portal, and they've got to be quality guys. It's going to be really tough, but this is a tough situation for Michigan State to go through. But they got to get it right, and to me, it's better to have the Band-Aid pulled off right now, and make the change now than to see this be a slow death spiral and then have to build. Kind of rebuild it like what I think Indiana's going to end up doing.
Yeah. I mean, what if Michigan State had lost in that fashion with Mel Tucker and this scandal was not in place? And what if Michigan State went out this year and went 4-8, and you're looking at him with 7 more years and $70 million on the contract? That could have been worse than this horrific situation they have right now for the short term. They could have been facing some long-term ills that way also. And there's people in the Tucker camp that think that that's part of the reason why this was moved forward internally. I mean, there's a lot more to unravel in that whole soap opera. As far as Michigan State football players go, By Job, the highest-ranked recruit from the incoming freshman class, played a few snaps on Saturday. At this point, you're starting to wonder, okay, everybody knows about the portal. Everybody knows about this. There's players on this team that came here to play for Mel Tucker. There's players on this team that are going to be approached in the portal by teams all over the country. That's already happening. They're reaching out, direct messaging. Representatives, unofficial representatives from schools are contacting players. That's the way it is these days. Everybody knows it. In the meantime, if you're Michigan State, you're trying to put your best team out there. But in the back of your mind, do you put people on the field also that might be freshmen, that might be looking to get out the door, just to give them a taste and give their cooks in the kitchen back home a taste of what he looks like and what he looks like on the field and maybe doesn't look like on the field. These enter in it also, especially when in a blowout situation. I thought it was interesting that Jalen Thompson did not play. Maybe he was injured too. I thought he looked good in short spurts of snaps in the first two games. Freshman from Detroit Cass Tech. He didn't play. They didn't mention all the injury situations, but that's a position that all of a sudden has a depth problem. But all these other things with the rules the way they are today make me sit and try to figure out, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? I'm not insinuating anything with those players, but these are decisions you make when you're trying to keep a roster together and in terms of roster management and just the general managerial aspect of college football today.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like being a baseball GM sometimes, like where you're giving a guy like some work, even though, I'm thinking like a minor league type of situation. In a blowout game like that, why not? It's not going to, it was good to see some guys out there like Jack Nickel out there at tight end.
Yeah, and we're getting to game 4. After game 4, if you've played 4 games, then if you want to preserve redshirt status like Connor Hayward did in 2019, you might opt out. Connor Hayward's one of the few players around here that's done that. Now, someone who's already redshirted, there's no reason to opt out. Right. But someone who has not redshirted, do they preserve redshirt status, transfer the portal, maintain this year? Those are some things to look at also.
I thought the rule was now that like you can play 4 games. It can be any of them in the year.
True.
Right. So that's
if you've already played 4.
If you've already played 4, but I think with a guy like Jalen Thompson, you might need him for more. They probably want to redshirt him if possible.
Yeah. He's played 2 games.
He's played 2 games, and he's an in-state guy.
He looks good.
With a guy like.
You're exactly right. That might be as simple as that. They want to redshirt him. Right.
They think he's a long-term or really going to be a really good player. Like Harlan Barnett said last week, after the game, he said he was asked specifically about some of the defensive ends, and he said he expected some of those guys back. So maybe it's one of those deals, or maybe if there's a long-term deal, you're going to need at some point maybe Jalen Thompson does play more, but that remains to be seen. It's going to be interesting. I don't know with a guy like Bai Jobe, do you give him a taste because he still is very raw,
yes.
And I can see him developing in this program. To me, I don't know. With a guy like Bai Jobe, it's kind of tough for him because he is so raw. He needs to stay. It's almost in his best interest if he has a good defensive line coach to stay put and develop instead of going into a completely different system. I don't know. Like if he did move, it's going to be tough for him because he is sushi raw.
Well, I mean, he'll find a good defensive line coach anywhere.
Right, but I'm just saying in terms of not.
He'll think that. I mean,
I'm saying just in terms of not having played football. It's tough for a guy that hasn't played football to be making changes and going places when you don't have that baseline of experience.
Yeah, a lot of balls in the air over here at Michigan State as they try to juggle it and keep it all straightened out. As far as the coaching search goes, we had the article a couple days ago looking at some of the candidates, and other people have had coaching boards also out there. The watch list is what we called it. Mike Elko from Duke. I mean, it's one of the things when you come out and you have a surprising 8-5 season last year, took over a program that I think went 3-9 the year before when Cutcliffe retired. He comes in, former defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, and has an amazing turnaround at Duke last year. 8-5, I think they were. And then this year gets off to a 3-0 start, really handled Northwestern easily last weekend, and their victory over Clemson in week 2 was one of the bigger stories in college football. 28-7, beat them handily. Suddenly, quickly, he becomes, because he's at a program like Duke, which has not been the most football-forward program in the past, he's going to be high on a lot of watch lists. And right now, Michigan State is the program that is looking for a new coach at some point. And Elko, he's interesting. There's other interesting ones. But that's an impressive guy, Paul. I mean, he was a safety, an all-Ivy League safety. I think he won an Ivy League championship at Penn. Coordinator at a high level at A&M and Notre Dame. I've talked to people who have had kids that were recruited by him at A&M. They say he's a great recruiter. He's honest. He's a hard recruiter and aggressive recruiter. 46 years old, entering the prime of his coaching career, and his staff. If you look at his staff, he's got a lot of Ohio coaches in there, Pennsylvania coaches in there, Buford High School. A guy that A to Z at this early stage in his career appears to be checking a lot of boxes as a candidate for the job. That's one that's caught my eye right now, Paul, and a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, I look at a few things because there are guys that have really good seasons. I think when a guy that's a defensive guy takes over an offensive program, or one that's, I think of Mark D'Antonio as a perfect example, coming in here, taking over a team that scored some points, but didn't have a defense, and they turn it around that way. That's impressive to me. The ACC sometimes in my mind is kind of a red flag because, you mentioned the win over Clemson. I think Clemson, to me, watching them in a few games this year, reminds me of what Virginia Tech was before people realized they weren't any good. There's that one team that is holding on, and they're like, "Oh, look at the talent." I think that you look at cell programs, and I would say Clemson right now is a cell program. I don't think they've adapted to the new way of doing things in college football. I think I don't think they were prepared to play Duke, but I do think Elko is a guy. When you look at his resume, like where he's been. I remember back to when he was recruiting against Michigan State when he was at Notre Dame, I believe it was. He did a nice job there. He's got Midwest roots. I think a couple of things you got to look for. You got to look for someone that's got roots in the Midwest.
He has Midwest experience. He coached at Bowling Green a while from New Jersey.
New Jersey, but that's same type of. If Pennsylvania, if he's from Pennsylvania, it'd be the same type of deal. I think he fits well. He's a guy that fits well within this area. I think he's not like quirky, exotic, like a John L. Smith that brings the Southern kind of hokiness to him into this program. I think he's authentic. I think that's big. But you want to see people that kind of develop. You want to see people that recruit well, but player development's a huge deal. And you can't win it at Duke without developing players and getting the most out of them.
And the way this thing goes, I mean, he's got to, in order to remain a candidate, whether it's him or Dave Clawson or Jason Candle or, who's the guy at Washington State, Dickert? Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. There's a number of them based on a lot of things going on, but they got to keep winning. It's early this season, and someone who might have looked like a candidate, if all of a sudden they go 6-6 this year, that can happen too. I mean, I remember watching when D'Antonio was a candidate. When they were blown out by West Virginia, I was like, oh, that's going to hurt him. Even though it's just one game in a long, lengthy resume. And there was a play late in D'Antonio's career. It might have been the last game of the regular season. They were playing UConn, and Cincinnati was losing by like 3 or 4.
I remember that play.
With like a minute and 55 left, and D'Antonio punted back to them. When I went back and rewatched the game, all that I knew at the time is that they came back and beat UConn. And I remember being at a Michigan State basketball game at Breslin Center that day, and you and I were talking about it with some people. And I was like, man, in the meantime, if D'Antonio wants a job, they better not lose this game to Connecticut, because it was kind of going on at that time. Won the game. That helped his resume just a little bit. I think they went 7-5 maybe. If they lose that and go 6-6, he might have not gotten a job. One game. Maybe he would have. I don't know. But they punted it. Got 3 stops, 3 timeouts, got back and won the game. Very unorthodox move. He did that against Iowa later, did that later for Michigan State. But that day, if that situation right there doesn't pan out, that one game would hurt his resume, hurt his chances to win the press conference if you're hiring. So there's a lot of football games to be played this fall that will have an impact on the candidacy of a lot of those candidates.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Michigan State needs to do a better job of is looking at, like what they did with D'Antonio, they need to look into the background. He went 7-5, 7-6 that year. But one of the things that he did is he took a Cincinnati team out of Conference USA, brought it to the Big East, and was playing with Conference USA type talent in the Big East and having success and doing so at in an impressive fashion. I think that you need to kind of dig through the layers and see how a program was built, see what kind of players they have, see what they, there's a lot of different things to it. The one thing about D'Antonio, and even in that, what you'd say is that's kind of crazy moment about giving it back, punting it, trusting his defense, and then going. He had a belief in his guys that they were going to do it in this way, and when you have that belief, sometimes it works out.
For instance, if Pittsburgh were 3-0 right now, I know Narduzzi's 58 and all that stuff, and there's some people he's polarizing as a candidate, but 1-2 losing to Cincinnati and West Virginia at this time, that hurts his candidacy.
It hurts his candidacy, but it doesn't necessarily take him off the map. I think of all the games that, all the times that Iowa fans wanted Kirk Ferentz fired.
Yeah.
You end up winning 8 or 9 games after looking bad early. It's about how you finish, but.
And right now people are commenting, please no Narduzzi, which I don't understand. I do and I don't, because people are more amazed and dazzled by someone who goes 8-4 in 1 year at Marshall than somebody who's won the damn ACC.
But it's always that way, Jim. Think about it.
Because somebody who has a blank piece of paper, the unknown is undefeated. They've not coached long enough to endure losses. So the guy at Washington State who's 7-6, people are more enamored by that than somebody who's won the ACC.
Right. Well, I understand. When you go back in my theory on like how you do with what you have. I'll use the guy at Washington State and I'll use Oregon State as an example as well. Those teams lost. Both of those teams lost recruits to Michigan State because of NIL, but they're still finding a way to win. And
Who is?
Guys like Washington State
they're 3-0.
and Oregon State. I'm just saying, like in general, what Dickert has done at Washington State.
He went 7-6 last year.
Yeah, and he did it with some of the worst. What I'm saying is he's doing it with the have-nots. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference between doing it with the haves than doing it with the have-nots. They're not getting the talent that other teams get because Michigan State is going out there and spending X amount of money to bring in like their committed players.
I'll give you another example. Jason Candle, his first 2 years at Toledo, like 9-3, 10-4. Right then, everybody would have loved him, but he had a couple of years that were kind of 500. Then he comes back and goes 9-4 again. But people use their imagination. After 1 or 2 years, they're more dazzled by that than somebody who's been around longer. And that's another reason that people like assistant coaches, because Brian Hartline's never lost a game.
Well, I understand that, but I'm just saying, like, I understand what you're saying, and I wouldn't overestimate.
And the fewer games you've lost, the brighter the bloom is.
I wouldn't overestimate some guys and be like, oh, this guy's the hot guy. But I think you also have to acknowledge when you have teams like, just like a Vanderbilt. If a guy's at Vanderbilt and does well, that's a feather in his cap.
Sure.
When you do well at Washington State, you do well at Oregon State, even if it's like 500 or a little bit above. That's what I think D'Antonio, he was like ranked. Remember that Athlons thing that came out? It might have been Phil Steele, but they ranked the head coaches hirings, and D'Antonio was way down there that year. It was like a C-, D+ type hire. It's because people didn't look in the weeds and see what he had done to build what he had.
And the fit. People say, Michigan State does not need to hire somebody who's been here, don't need to hire somebody who knows coaches. I tell you what, at this place, it helps. I mean, John L. Smith came in here and didn't really know the landscape. D'Antonio did. That helped. Saban did. That helped. Tucker did to an extent. Hadn't been around in 20 years or so. Had other problems going on. But to come here, you need to know recruiting Ohio, recruiting locally, and the positives and the landmines and all those things. It's not a prerequisite because Elko doesn't know it other than coaching in the MAC. He's aware of some things. But in those cases, it is a big deal. Now, this year with this pool of candidates, in my estimation, there are no candidates that have been here that are ready for a job like this. So that's kind of being pushed aside. But that's a big reason why Alan Haller and Izzo and Hollis and the people that were involved in hiring D'Antonio, a big reason they brought him back is because they knew him, he knew the place, and that gave him a better chance to get it going. Jonathan Smith, Oregon State, 9-3 last year. You're exactly right. With a roster of have-nots, in some cases, to do what he's done, and they were ranked in the top. They're ranked in the top 20 right now, deep into the top 20. That's a great coaching job. Now that guy, great coach, but he played at Oregon State. He loves Oregon State. Oregon State's in a problem. It has problems financially. They're in a state of flux. They need some stability. That guy, that coach, a young coach, he might feel compelled to stay home and help them ride it out, even though it's a 35,000 seat stadium, even though their budget's not going to be very good, and he'll be tremendously underpaid. Getting him to come out here, that's going to be difficult. He's a great coach and a great candidate, but there are obstacles.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for his coaching staff too, because you're going to have to keep those guys together. You're going from a Pac-12, and it's a higher cost of living out there. You're going from a Pac-12 salary to a Mountain West salary, and these people have families they need to take care of. And for young coaches that have families that are in elementary school, it's easier to stay put and something like that. But financially, man, with it's tough. You're going about let's say you're making $500,000, maybe more as a coordinator, and then you're going to be asked to make less than $200,000.
Keeping your staff
right, and it's really, and that's a real tough thing, and so those are the kind of challenges that those programs face. And I just think that Michigan State, knowing the area is a big deal, but I think it's a temperament type thing. You want someone. we hear all the time about Michigan State's physical football. It's team-oriented football. The sum of the parts is supposed to be better than the individual talent. Well, if you believe that to be true, and I do, and at this university, then you have to find someone with that temperament that's willing to develop, cultivate, and bring in guys with that like-minded mentality. And so you've got to do your homework. Now, fortunately for Michigan State, they're going to be able to have a lot of time to do their homework. It's not a scenario where they've got a coach leaving after a season going to the NFL and they've got to deal with whatever leftovers are out there. They're going to be if they play this right, they're going to be have their choice of candidates. That doesn't mean he's going to be the right guy, but it's better than what they experienced after D'Antonio's retirement.
I keep saying every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser. You can look at the candidates, and there might be 10 candidates there, and 4 of them would do a good job here. There might be 1 that would do great here, and there might be 4 that wouldn't do well, and it's hard to tell who's who. I mean, no one would have thought D'Antonio was going to do what he did here. Everybody would have thought that Scott Frost was a no-brainer, great hire at Nebraska. He had some problems, too. He'd gone 12-0 at UCF at Central Florida, went to Nebraska, former coach, Golden Boy. No-brainer, he's the right guy, and it tanked. No one would have ever thought that Dabo Swinney was the right hire at Clemson. He was interim coach, wide receivers coach, and he was interim coach for Bowden, who had failed. He comes in, finishes the year. They didn't do that great at the end of the year. They went like 3-3. They retained him. They beat South Carolina. So what? They retained him. Clemson fans hated that. Wide receivers coach, and he went on to win a national championship. There was no reason to think that was the right hire. I remember, back when D'Antonio was hired, we were on a show, a local TV show, talking about the coaching search at the time, and I mentioned, on that coaching show, I said, a dark horse is Mark D'Antonio. There were other candidates that were around, and people weren't talking up D'Antonio a whole lot at the time. But I said, in looking at some of the other candidates, I thought that there were 2 that had a chance to be great. I thought Brian Kelly and Ron English. Every hand's a winner, every hand's a loser. Right. But at this point, Brian Hartline could be great. I don't know, for some program somewhere. Some could work out, some couldn't. And to sit there and say that 100% that this guy is a bad hire, you're stupid if you think that. Right. And if you say 100% this guy is a can't miss, and Michigan State is stupid to not take this guy, whoever it is stupid because we don't know. So anyone who thinks they know, they don't know.
Yeah, I would say, I'm not saying that this is the be-all, end-all, but I would have a hesitancy with a guy like Brian Hartline, who has dealt with, just for him, for example, dealt with nothing but halves.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because and it takes something different to win with talent. I get that. But just I don't think John Shire necessarily would be a good basketball hire for Michigan State. He might be great for Duke because he's used to playing in that. He's used to that atmosphere. But could he win at Michigan State? Some guys are good fits for some places. Some guys are not good fits for other. You saw, Wisconsin make the wrong choice when they hired Oregon State head coach. He did well out there. Not a good fit for Wisconsin. So you've got to make sure that your guy fits your personality as a university. Every university has a personality. And then also I think you got to make sure, and this is the tough part, I think, for a lot of schools, Michigan State and Notre Dame are 2 of the schools that come to mind where I think there's a lot, maybe that's just because we're in the area and we're familiar with it, but there's a lot of different egos that go on and, behind the scenes on board of trustees and whatnot. The one thing that helped Mark D'Antonio was I think there was a strong leadership in place at the presidential level. I think the athletic department was in a pretty good spot with the athletic director, and there wasn't as much interference, and D'Antonio didn't allow there to be any interference. He didn't play favorites. He wasn't, open door with some trustees and closed doors with others. He, it was kind of off hands with all of them, and he took the right approach for what the job that needed to be done. But that's where it gets dicey when you need to move on the candidate and you've got behind the four boards infighting. This is my guy. This is my guy. Everyone needs to be on the same page, and
or an agenda that they want met to interrupt a process.
Exactly, and that's not uncommon in a lot of different schools. What you see happen, a lot is teams end up overpaying for the guy that they really need, or the guy that they have to settle for because this guy wasn't good enough to meet my ideals, or I want attention. I want to be the person that everyone tells, that makes the decision. I want to be the kingmaker, and that's not going to work it doesn't work. But Michigan State needs to find a way to get back to where they were in terms of like vision, and let the people that need to make the decisions and get on board when those decisions are made. Otherwise, you run the risk of really messing something up.
D'Antonio he benefited from a strong athletic director in Hollis who had the support of Luana Simon. D'Antonio had the support of Luana Simon, and Luana Simon had the power to keep everybody's mouth shut on the board of trustees. Right now, Michigan State has not had strength at the presidential level for the last several years, not just the person who's in place on an interim basis right now, but just in general. In the meantime, it's a lame duck situation. And whoever comes here as a football coach doesn't know who the president's going to be at this point. That's not going to help Michigan State. So, people that think that Michigan State can just hire this nameless, faceless guy that's just going to do a great job, it's going to be tricky. There are some good ones out there, and Michigan State, there are going to be some that are interested in Michigan State, and there's going to be some that are not. And Michigan State's going to sift through that. In the meantime, they'll support this team and see what becomes of this season. And a lot of balls are in the air, and a lot of fans still have a lot to watch. Harlan Barnett said he's hoping that the fans come out and are supportive as they were last week, because they were a great support. And Barnett was emotional when they did the Spartan walk coming through here. He was fired up. He's hoping the same thing will happen this weekend in a tough game against Maryland, with a lot going on for Michigan State football fans.
Yeah, I will say one last thing I want to say is a lot of people are going to look at the Michigan State job, and some people are going to be like, it's not an attractive job because you're playing in a conference where it's going to be hard to win. Most football coaches out there want to compete against the best and want to prove that they can compete against the best. And there's going to be people that want to coach in the Big Ten, just like there's people that want to coach in the SEC. That doesn't mean they're going to be successful. We see a lot of coaching failures in the SEC, and recently we've seen a lot of coaching failures in the Big Ten. As the stakes rise as a conference, it's harder and harder to win. We see that in Big Ten basketball all the time. Guys that come in don't do as well. This is a big super power conference, especially with the 4 teams coming in, and there's going to be a lot of people that want to be in that mix to prove that they're the best coach in the country.
Sure, I think Lance Leipold would be in that category at Kansas. The age situation might not be perfect for a lot of people. I don't know. I'm not making a statement on that. I'm just throwing that out there as one of the items. Chris Kleeman at Kansas State is an interesting one, who might not want to make the jump. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We'll see if those guys become grade A candidates or not. But that behind the scenes, agents are talking, and those things are happening. In the meantime, there's a lot of games. It's only September. A lot of games need to be played to spruce up some of those candidacies. And there will be candidates that rise up that might go 10-2 this year that we're not even talking about, because we've got a whole season to play. Anything else, Paul? For Paul Konernick, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been watching the VCast from East Lansing, Michigan, outside Spartan Stadium with the Spartans, SpartanMag.com.